Welcome, everyone. Good evening, good morning from wherever you're joining from. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is MK Comer. I'm a Women Who Code Leadership Fellow. I help facilitate a lot of the events here with our front end track. And I'm so excited to introduce to you all Amy. Amy is here with us. She's joining us from Alaska. Hi, Amy. Amy is an accessibility specialist at Digilou. And she is here to give a three-part series. Tonight, we are on night number 2 of our accessibility series. And tonight, we're here to talk about easy accessibility wins. Before I pass over the mic to Amy, I'm going to give a warm Women Who Code introduction and kind of run through some logistics for tonight's webinar. So as I said, as you join, feel free to introduce yourself via the chat and where you're joining from. I always find it's really great to see where women are joining from all over the world. Additionally, we are going to do Q&A at the end of this Zoom via the Q&A functionality. So feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar, and we will be sure to get to them at the end of the webinar. Additionally, all of our webinars are recorded and posted to YouTube. So if you're feeling like we're moving quickly or you want to review some concepts afterwards, those will all be on YouTube. As well, if you missed the first event, you can catch up on our YouTube channel as well. Additionally, Amy will be throwing a couple of links in the chat. My goal is to grab all of those links and also Amy's presentation, and I will send that out to everyone tomorrow so that you'll have the slides to review at your own time. That being said, I'm going to give a warm Women Who Code introduction. Whether or not this is your first webinar with us or you've been on quite a few webinars, welcome. Our mission at Women Who Code is to inspire women to excel in our technology careers. We truthfully envision a world where women are representative as tech executives, founders, VCs, board members, and software engineers. I would like to kind of quickly go through our code of conduct as it's very important to us. Women Who Code is an inclusive community. We are dedicated to providing an empowering experience for all people, whether or not you're participating, regardless of gender, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, ability, physical appearance, body size, race, ethnicity, age, religion, and as we often like to joke, preferred programming languages. This event and all of our events are inspired to inspire women to excel in technology careers. So everyone is welcome, and we do not tolerate any harassment of members in any form. That being said, our commitment to you all as members, as the world has changed drastically in the last year, we hope we can be a connecting force to create that sense of belonging while the world has been asked to isolate. Hope you're all hanging in there and can attend more and more of our webinars this year. Currently, Women Who Code, we have over 250,000 members. We hit the 250,000 member mark at the end of 2021. Very exciting. We have 70 networks in 20 different countries, and we have members in 120 different countries. As I'm sure you can imagine, with COVID going on, we've tried to move a lot of our in-person network events onto our digital platforms. So thank you, Amy, for being part of that movement. And we put on over 2,000 events annually and give out conference tickets as well as scholarships. You can sign up to our Code Review, which is our weekly newsletter, and it sends out updates for those conference tickets and scholarships, as well as access to jobs and on our job board and resources. So if you're looking for a new job, we partner with various companies that are specifically looking for women engineers. So check out our job board, and also just coding resources as well. Our goal is to provide infinite connections, and hopefully tonight you're able to network with some other women on this webinar as well. Tonight you're here with the front end track. However, there are 6 tracks, digital tracks, all designed to provide tech talks, workshops, tutorials, and trainings, as well as technical study, project groups. We host panels, fireside chats, lightning chats, and networking opportunities. So if you're not just interested in front end and you're interested in other areas such as data science, mobile, blockchain, Python, and cloud, feel free to check those out at womenwhocode.com/digital. There are plenty of events in all of our different tracks running pretty much every day. We have an event at this point. Additionally, if you're interested in getting involved, you can reach out to me directly at mkcomer@womenwhocode.com. I help facilitate our volunteer team, all of which are incredible women who help put on events and also speak at various events. And if you're also interested in volunteering or speaking and putting on your own event at any of our other tracks, and you think that talk might align to those tracks, you can reach out to any of those specific tracks at womenwhocode.com. And finally, we also do sponsorships. So if your company is interested in hiring women engineers or tapping into our Women Who Code network, we sponsor with companies to put job descriptions up on our job board. And oftentimes companies also work with us to put on really fun events or hackathons. So if you've got a good idea, feel free to reach out to our partnerships team. Just a couple closing items. Just wanted to put a couple upcoming events for 2021 on your radar. So this is the second of 3 of Amy's multi-series accessibility event. So check out the third event on February 2nd, next Tuesday at the same time. Additionally, one of our lead volunteers is restructuring our front end Fridays. That is an open study group. You can ask any sort of questions via Slack. And each week is designed to focus on something different. So upcoming for this Friday, we will be focusing on front end CS fundamentals. The following week, we'll be focusing on HTML and CSS for front end. And February 12th, we'll be focusing on front end frameworks. That being said, I'm also very excited to announce that I brought in a speaker who is going to be talking about building mental health resources in tech. I know everyone's probably tired of working remote, and it's very important that we have those mental health resources. So check that talk out on February 5th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And finally, a new event that also just started this winter, the front end volunteer team gets together and puts on front end full disclosure. It's an AMA session. Feel free to jump on to the session. We do it via Zoom, and it's an open opportunity to network with other members and ask any sort of questions to our volunteer team that have various amounts of experience in front end as well as back end, but a great networking opportunity as well as just a chance to ask any sort of questions. And that is coming in mid-February, so I'll be posting that shortly once we kind of decide on a nice time with the volunteer team. That being said, let's go ahead and pass the mic over to Amy. Amy, thank you so much for being here tonight. And we're so excited to learn about easy accessibility wins. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Okay, so I will go ahead and share my screen. What I'm going to do is turn my video off, so that way we can get right into the slides. Okay, so we've got that, and everyone should be able to see my screen here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, since this is the second one in the series, I'm going to just dive right in. You can check out the first one if you need a more formal introduction of myself. During this hour talk, I want to impart to you that there are some easy things that you can do to start working on accessibility today. Some common failures that are happening across the web that really aren't hard to fix. I think that people just aren't quite aware of what's happening. So I'm going to walk you through those, and we're going to be bouncing a lot between my slides and the browser just so we can start looking at examples and figure out ways that we need to target those issues that are happening. So basically using like tools to find out where the issue is, and then the solution for it, and which, as front-end coders, it's not going to be too difficult for you. So I'm hoping that you walk away with feeling a little more confident that you can just start and you can avoid some of these common failures that are happening. So first, a little bit of context. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Oops. Why I want to start with those, it's not something that I want you to dig into the specifications for, but the main point of me bringing up the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, is that it's a starting point. So when we talk about accessibility, and we already discussed, or I talked to you about last week, that what is accessibility, who is it for? And when you are thinking about these things in your mind, you need to think about what kind of standard or how you want to comply, or what kind of laws that you're following. So where do you want to begin when you define accessibility? Are you going to have some kind of measurement of usability testing that you're going to have? Are you trying to meet specific guidelines like WCAG and the success criteria that they bring out? Maybe at a level A, maybe at a level AA, which one do you want, 2? Do you want 2.1? It's just making sure that when you start and you say, I want to do this, and especially if you're working within an organization, it's good to have that starting point and that measuring point. Where do we want to aim for? And what does that tell us we need to do to make things accessible? So often when I'm doing accessibility audits, people are going by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, mostly because that's an international thing. The W3C aims for that to be global, and hoping that it can be kind of a standard that people can work off of. But it's by no means a law anywhere. There are a lot of laws that base off of it. And hold on, I think my thing has disconnected. Okay. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. And so, so oftentimes people like to use WCAG because it often fits nicely within to their countries or states or local law. So WCAG documents and explains WCAG documents. So they have many documents. They explain how to make web content more accessible to people with disabilities. So going back, it's aimed to help people with disabilities, and it tries to provide a bunch of criteria for the information that you're providing, whether that's text, images, or media, sound, video, and also the code and markup for structures and presentation. So what this talk tonight is dealing with is focusing a lot on WCAG, and the common failures that are happening on the web are because they are not meeting WCAG success criteria. So jumping off of that, WebAIM, which is an organization that puts effort into training people about accessibility. They put out a lot of neat articles that are free to read to help you learn accessibility for web and for documents. And they have been doing some reports the last couple of years called the WebAIM Million. And basically, they conduct an evaluation of homepages for over 1 million websites. Some of them include interior site pages. And they use that. They have this thing called a WAVE tool, and that you can actually use as a browser extension, or you can go to that website, and it's like a web app that'll run a scan page by page on your website. And it's not like your entire website, but one page by page. And so you can put in a web page, and it'll kind of give you some errors or some things that you've done right, and kind of point out what those things are. It's all pass or fail, so it's all automated. A lot of times automated scans get you a step forward for what you need to do for accessibility for your site, but it doesn't end there. It really only covers a smaller percentage of what it can accomplish, and then going from there, manual testing is appropriate. But we'll get more into that in my next third talk. But so anyhow, I wanted to share with you WebAIM and this Million report that they've done in 2019, 2020, and I imagine that they're probably going to do it again this year if all went normal for them. And this is some of the things that they came up with, some of the data they pulled from those million websites, some of the common fails that have been happening, and some have slightly improved over the year, and some have decreased over time. So a lot of things that are happening, as an overview of what we're going to go over today, is that low contrast text is happening. So people, when they're looking at it, may have a hard time reading the content that's on there because the text on top of the background is just not strong enough contrast. Also missing alternative text for images, empty links, missing form input labels, empty buttons, and a missing document language. Some of these feel like they might be a little more intuitive to you depending on how long you've been doing HTML and front-end work. And then some of it I'm going to explain a little bit better as we go. So one thing I really want to drive home today is that as front-end developers, we are failing. According to this Web A Million, here we as front-end developers are choosing to be the liaison between the user and the machine, and yet we are failing at talking to the machine. So we're not either using HTML, CSS, or JavaScript the way it was specified to be used, or we are not communicating well with the users. And that's the whole basis of the web, is we are communicating information to our neighbors across the world. It's a great connecting point, but if we can't communicate with people well, if they cannot receive that information, it becomes inaccessible to them, and then it's just useless. And so we want to strive to write code to specification so it works well for everyone, and we want to do our best to communicate well with users, so the information that we put out there is perceivable and operable, understandable, and robust. And again, if you ever dig into WCAG, that's what those principles are, so it can be accessible. I don't really want to go too much into WCAG. I feel like that could be classes and classes worth of information to understand. But one success criteria I just wanted to bring light to today, just because this is such a common one that fails in accessibility audits that I do, is the info and relationship success criteria, the 1.3.1. And this just goes back to how when we're communicating with people and trying to offer them information to access, sometimes when we think that it's available to them, it's not always available to them. So what this success criteria is saying, and quote, information, structure, and relationships conveyed through presentation can be programmatically determined or are available in text. And this we'll touch on in some of these points today. So basically, just because you see something on your screen doesn't mean that somebody else is able to consume that information if they cannot see it or if they cannot hear it, if it's not available in an alternate format for them to access that works with their assistive technology or the strategies that they use to access the internet. So this covers so many things, and I'd encourage you to actually look at that. And one place that I'm going to take you quickly to, I'll go ahead and copy in this link. I don't know where my Zoom's at here. So this URL here takes you to the W3CUA website, and that does a lot of information. I shared it in the last talk that I had too. And this specifically is that page that goes to talk about web content accessibility guidelines. And one of the things, this quick reference, I even look at a lot, and it helps break things down a little bit. And it shows you techniques that you can use. And so if I wanted to go to 1.3.1 over here, info and relationships, this talks about sufficient techniques to be able to meet that, whether it's through ARIA, whether it's general semantic elements that you need, and the way you separate information between presentation as well as the architecture. So, and these just lead off to their own pages going further into how to better do that, and sometimes even provide code examples that can help you. For those of you interested, I will also provide the Web A Million link. I would definitely encourage you to read that and the information that they found. Again, I pulled out just some of the top things that are failing, but this goes into detail more and more of what's happening and things that people need to be doing on sites. For the Wave browser extension, and today I want to note that I'm catering to Mac users. and to Chrome users, because when I took a poll last week, it seemed like a lot of people were using Chrome, and it's understandably so, and a lot of Mac users. But to let you know, the Wave extension, WebAIM's Wave tool, is available through Chrome and Firefox. And we'll look a little bit at that today. I won't go into great detail on how to use it, but I will point some things out. Okay, so let's go ahead. We can close the chat. Okay, so contrast. I'm going to start with contrast. And so one of the things mentioned that is happening on the web on a lot of home pages is low contrast text. And I think some of that, of not necessarily improving greatly, is there's been a trend going on with a lot of gray color being used for your font color, and sometimes even putting that on top of another color that might be even a gray in itself. But just some of that gray, you want something that's definitely pops from the screen. It's hard to overdo contrast. There are some cases where some people, if you do too high of a contrast, it can be hard on people where it gives them like a migraine. And sometimes those people do have their own strategies to take down contrast. They might change colors or whatnot. But the bare minimum, according to WCAG, is that you want to have a 4.5 to 1 contrast between foreground and background colors. WCAG does address that you do still need to pay attention to gradients, but gradients get hard because an automated checker doesn't necessarily take that into account. So that's something you would have to manually test. You also need to take into consideration links. Need to be considered when you have a link within, say, a paragraph, and you have, so surrounding text might be a black, and then your link is a blue or a green, and so you need to keep in mind how those colors all play together. So maybe that link isn't popping compared to the text that's around it or the background that it's sitting on. The best way to tackle this is in the design phase. You don't want to be putting this online and then like afterwards, like, oh no, this doesn't really pop. It's not meeting minimum contrast, but this is our color palette. So if you can go back to when you're in the design phase and as you're deciding colors, and maybe you're not even a part of that process, but this is just something if you are able to bring it up, that it kind of stems back to there on color choices. And then once those are implemented online. And so what I'm going to do is jump back over to the browser. An online automated checker from WebAIM. Let me get over to Zoom here. I'm going to put that in the chat so you all can look. So WebAIM has their own contrast checker. And basically you would use, a lot of times what I do when I take colors is there is a Colorzilla Eyedropper. You can get that on Chrome or Firefox for sure. And here, let me go ahead and drop that link in so it's easy. You can also Google it too, but I find just taking links is easier. And so, here we go. So a lot of times you can pick a color from a page, you know, and say, okay, you know, that's my background color or my foreground color, sorry. And then a background, you know, might be white, which is fairly common. And so you could put that in there. So this right off will start showing you if it fails or passes WCAG, and that's strictly based on, you know, what's coded in, whether it's in your CSS. and that's what it's going off of. So that's why checks are also important. So you have like this image back here. Well, how is this image affecting things? Your automated checker isn't going to tell you, but for a lot of basic text on top, this is a good place to go. And also they have their link checker, which this helps you do some of that comparison between link color, body text color, and background color. And I'll drop that in the chat. If you would prefer to do something that's more of a separate application, I like to use the Pacquiello Group's color contrast analyzer. And that I can first show you an example of what it looks like. It doesn't play perfectly well with my resolution. It kind of cuts it off. So sometimes I have to change the resolution of my screen because I have it at a different display to zoom in. But this one uses a color picker. And so anywhere you can do this, and then you can do that for the background. So the background here, and here's the foreground. So if I was like doing my slides here, yay, so my slides pass. So that's something, and I will drop that there in the chat too, of where you can download that. That's free to use. So it's all about your preference of what's easier for you to use. But there are lots of tools. By no means are these the only tools, but these are things that I've often used just because they were introduced to me when I was starting out. And so from that, I want you all to either go to the WebAIM because it's right there, or if it only takes you a minute to download the application, that's fine. I would suggest going to a contrast checker and then go to a web page maybe that you've done and start doing some of those checks. Another way would be if you want to download the Wave tool extension for Chrome, and that's what I will also go ahead and show a demo of. I always will put in these activities, I don't see how there's really a way to do it unless, you know, somebody who's on this talk is colorblind and wants to jump in and give their opinion of how they're seeing it and if they're finding what that experience is like for them on the web. But I always want to note and center people with disabilities that when you are doing testing, when you are doing checks, nothing beats having somebody with a disability that impacts that person in particular. So color really impacts people who are colorblind, people with low vision. And so if you can find someone that's available to you, or there are services online if you have it in your budget to contact, that people will do that kind of testing for you for a fee, that they have people with disabilities on call. That's a good way to go. But these automated tools are a good start, and they kind of make you stop and look at it and check out your code and see what's going on. And so what I'll do, so going to Women Who Code, and I'm going to just run the Wave tool because it's fast to do. And all it is once it's downloaded, you just hit that. And it comes through, and there's a contrast errors section that pops up. And this shows 0 contrast. And again, it's checking all of the text on background. And so it's not actually checking what's happening here with this background image. But it's good to see. And it also has a separate contrast right tab at the end, and it'll kind of show you, and it even lets you play. So this is WebAIM's contrast checker that they pull in to this API. It even lets you kind of play with the colors a little bit with a slider, or let you put something in. If you find something is low contrast, you can play with it a little bit in real time to see like, oh, if I just bump this a little bit, maybe we can swap out that color. Okay. Oh, and one other resource I really wanted to show you because I was excited about this. So someone who does a bit of design as well. And so I'm a part of the design phase for things that I've worked on. There's this really neat tool called 8 Shapes Contrast Grid. And what you can do is basically enter in the hex codes. And then if you want to even separate with a comma and put in, what you'd like to define it as, you can start in your design process by putting in these hex codes, and it'll give you a comparison. No, that's not in the way. And so it starts showing, and it's all automated again. So you're kind of guessing a little bit, but tries to tell you if you're passing that 4.5 to 1 ratio. So here's a color I'd pulled from WWCode. And when you have that black right on top, then that's passes the level A WCAG requirement. And some of these other things it'll define below to say, whether it's pass, large text only. And again, you'd have to kind of review some of the WCAG spec to learn a little bit about what that all means. Like some passing it, some colors on top of other colors work if the text is larger or smaller. And here it'll actually send you to a link, it looks like. So double check, did I put that in the chat? It draws in all those hex codes too, but you can change all those. Okay, so for alternative text, the next failure, alternative text is easy, it's hard. The fun and funny part about it is it's a science and an art. Alt text happens on your image elements, and you have the alt attribute. And most times you should be filling that in with something. If you're not filling it in, if you leave it blank, but making sure that you have the href attribute, and there's nothing in between your double quotes, that implies it's decorative. And what happens is when a screen reader is going over the page, it then ignores that element. It might as well be hidden. And so when you leave that attribute blank, you intentionally want it to be just decorative. It doesn't need to be mentioned. But in most cases, I think that a lot of images will be content because that's partly what background images are about in CSS. And I'll leave that up for debate for your team of when you should use background images and when you shouldn't. You should use the image element. But when the image is supposed to be part of the content, you need to have something filled in, some kind of string that is, you want it to describe the image, but you want it to really say what the image is saying. If there is image in the text, then you need to put in that text because somebody is otherwise going to completely miss whatever text might be in that image. So including text, trying to say what the image is going to say. My recommendation to a lot of people is that's not really supposed to be on the development team's shoulders. When somebody provides you with content to go on your site, you need to have those conversations to talk to them about what kind of alt text needs to go in there, even if you have to explain alt text to them. But let them know this needs to arrive with the content and the image, and tell them. So that way, the people who are the content creators are still getting the message across and not excluding people. And you're not left with the, oh, well, I think this is what the image is saying. I'm not really sure. So, I mean, you could make something up, but it's best if you can have that conversation earlier before it lands on you. Alternative text, sometimes if there's a lot to be said with an image, or screenshots are happening, or a chart was taken as one image rather than, say, an interactive chart or in a table, you might have to also provide that alternative in a visible sort of way. So if a picture of a chart is given to you, having maybe a true text table within a table element that describes that data can be helpful, whether they're given a link to go further down the page, but I would even suggest if you could put a table right underneath it, that would be helpful, because some people just process information differently. Maybe somebody doesn't understand the data when they look at the chart, but if they see it laid out by rows and columns, it'll make more sense to them. So it helps more than just somebody who's using a screen reader. But always think images and media need an alternative, whether it's in the alt attribute or whether it's visible somewhere. Find a way to do that and have conversations with your team to figure out what that information needs to be and what is allowable to be conveyed to people. Oops. Okay, so testing for alt text, we already know that it's the href attribute. Again, if you're able to have a person who uses a screen reader on a daily basis to help evaluate, to hear what that sounds like, to give you a better feel how it all works together, that's always good. The wave tool can identify that. And another perk of alt text is people with slow connections or people who turn images off to save data, the alt text will show up. So they are not missing out on information either. So you're actually helping way more people than just people with disabilities. So I'm going to go here and bring up the wave tool again. And actually an even better way. Okay, so I use sometimes too, because there is this web developer extension for Firefox and Chrome. And hold on, let me drop in the chat. Okay. All right, so I've used this one to help point out, because sometimes I get overwhelmed with all the things that Wave is seeing. So I'll refresh that to get that off. And then this web developer tool has all of these different things, including a little tab for images. And you could either disable images to see what that would look like, or you can display alt attribute. So if you'd want to do this as a more visual way, instead of looking at your code, you can see, so this one behind here must be a background image because it's not showing up. This targets the image element. It looks like here, home announcement, that's not very descriptive. It's totally missing on all these things that are happening. So that's, I wouldn't consider that appropriate alt text there. Looks like these must be background images that are linked. Okay, that's a whole nother thing. That brings up a good point. So most of the time, just static image elements are going to be descriptive. This is the whole science and art thing too. But if an image is linked, then the image, so say it's like wrapped in an anchor tag, it needs to describe its function. So if this is going somewhere, and say if this was actually an image tag instead of a background image, it would need to say that it is going to coding resources. So you'd want to put coding resources. You wouldn't necessarily want to describe that this is like a computer monitor. You would skip that, and you want to tell people where it's going, because people with assistive tech like screen readers are going to come to that and recognizing it as, you know, it's going to have a link that goes somewhere. And where does it go? Well, the accessible name is going to say what's inside of the link, and this image is there, and it taps into that alt attribute. And I think I was saying href on some other things, sorry. The alt attribute is going to have the name of what it is. That's its accessible name. And so you want people to understand clearly where that link is going. Okay. And so if you want to take a minute to kind of look and see how some of your alt text is. I think I probably better push on forward here. Empty links is another fail. It's happening. A link contains no text. So there's no accessible name that's provided. So basically, and this is just an example, this isn't for real. If I was using the Women Who Code and there's nothing in the anchor, or sometimes what happens is maybe this anchor tag is here and an SVG is put in between, but there's no accessible name. So there's no title attribute within, or no title element, sorry, within the SVG, or there's no text that's hidden visibly, but it's telling you where it goes. So these social media icons that are often used, they're missing that name. So somebody comes to and finds this link, but they don't know where it goes. They don't know what it's doing. And sometimes link hacks, when you're trying to like use a link for something and then making it into something else, and it can get very confusing fast. So just to go, I will see how Women Who Code is doing. And again, people with disabilities, screen reader users can help catch these things sometimes quicker. So running here. And let's see what kind of errors we're getting. Empty links. There are some empty links here. So where is that? So it should take you right there. And what's happening, it's probably getting buried in some of this overlap. So then I can go to the code and it'll show me. Okay, so we have this going on here. Data, there's the href. Okay, there's a div inside of there. Okay, so there's no title attribute for an accessible name. I don't see anything happening here. So there's no text, there's nothing. So if somebody comes into this link here, it's they're not going to know where it goes. Benefits leadership. Okay, that must be around here. There, finally popped up. Okay, so that goes back to this thing here, is that I imagine this div is creating maybe a background image, and then you're getting this link. If you're having duplication, which can happen, oh, but there's no link here. There's a link. There's a link, and these probably go to the same places. These will either need to match to say lead and lead, because you want text to match where they're going, so it doesn't sound confusing, like, hey, leadership, does that go to somewhere else than lead? Or you could give this like aria hidden, or just unlink it. There's a few different things you could go, but you have to look for consistency of what your text is saying, if they're going to the same place. Or if it can go vice versa. If you have like read more and you have 10 read more, but they're all different locations, that's confusing, because taken out of context, if somebody, say when I showed last week about NVDA has a list of links that it can pull up, and if they're reading by that, then they'll have no idea where this read more goes to. Or if they're seeing 2 leads, they can then assume, oh, it goes to the same spot. So you definitely want to make their experience clear and smooth. Okay, so missing label for input. I'm sure a lot of you have had experience with building some kind of forms, and when you're putting in your input elements, they need labels with them. Without those labels, labels are the accessible name for inputs. And so if they're just receiving an input, they might understand that they've come to an input, but they have no idea what it's for. Placeholders are not good accessible names. Those can be finicky with different assistive technologies. They might be interpreted different. So having the label, whether it's explicit or implicit, so if you're wrapping the input in a label, or if you're having the label for and then the input ID and having those match together, this not only benefits screen readers, but also people with motor disabilities. So what happens when you click on a label, let's see if I can take you over just to show. I'm trying to think of what might have a label. I don't know if they've got one right off. Sign in, this must be a form. Okay, so if I clicked on there, and there's no other things going on, but normally if you click on the label, then that highlights right in here. So that somebody who needs a bigger clicking area because their hand might be shaky, but they're still using a mouse, this gives them more clickable area because they are associated together. And so if you have a form in mind, I would encourage you to try to test with that to see if you can click on it, making sure that you have a label element in place that is associated to an input. Empty buttons, there's the same things happening with links and buttons. Maybe you have a submit button that you decided to use an SVG instead, but there's no accessible name, so it doesn't have a title element within the SVG, or there's no true text that's available inside the button that might be hidden visually, as long as it can be read aloud to a screen reader. It's just making things as clear as possible. I like seeing text with things because sometimes just like a paper airplane shooting through doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot to me. I can guess what it means. But if you can put, send along with that, that can just save you a lot of trouble and make it extra clear for other people. So testing for empty links, again, a screen reader user can often catch those very quickly and how that affects. Missing document language. This is such an easy win. All you have to do is add a language attribute to your HTML element. And most of you, can probably figure out what the language would be. And actually, I'm sorry, I probably should have brought a nice web page that kind of talks about those codes that goes down. But English is EN. English, you can even get a little more granular of EN-US, and that can help specify what this really helps with, and it impacts screen readers, is basically when a screen reader hits the page and it understands that this is an English or English US page, for instance, where I'm at, it will then, it molds itself to what it needs, how it needs to pronounce things. And if somebody hits a page with none, it's just going to then default to whatever the screen reader user's language is set at. And so if mine was defaulted to Spanish, it's going to read this English looking page kind of funny. And so if you can define the page, it can really help avoid any confusion that's going on. And it doesn't sound like a big deal, but to a screen reader user, it sure is nice that the web page talks clearly to the assistive technology, and there's no room for confusion there. And so testing for language, again, screen reader user would notice Wave tool catches this right away when you run this right at the top of the page here. And this is passing, shows this little globe, shows the entire page has been set to English US. So takeaways. Sorry about that. So as I mentioned last week, you can start today. Start with this low-hanging fruit. Make sure that you're putting alt text and good alt text for your images, or having some kind of accessible name or description, even if it's visible for your images. Making sure you have your language set for the page, making sure your links and buttons aren't empty and that they are clearly defined and unique from one another unless they're going to the same spot. And also making sure that contrast really pops. Those are only 5 things. And if you can think about those 5 things, you're already getting ahead of some of these other failures that are happening across so many web pages. Use HTML appropriately when possible. We're front-end developers. We have a lot of information to process, a lot of things that we have to learn, but those building blocks for making the structure of your page are just so important. They were created a certain way by the W3C so they would benefit everyone and not just, you know, some people, but everyone. Learn from people with disabilities. When you have the chance, talk to them, ask what their experiences are like. WCAG can get you so far. Some videos can kind of get you so far, but really people with disabilities, following them on social media, talking to them, finding out people you work with, if they have a particular disability they're willing to talk to you about, because it can be very, very personal. Just the more you talk to this group of people, the more it will open your eyes and help you understand where failures are coming from, and not just based on a checklist that you're trying to check off in each process, but really understanding what their experiences are like. And also making a daily effort to put this thought into the work that you do. So resources, WebAIM Million I shared with you, and I will copy this link here to just drop in the chat. And this is a great video from Vision Australia. And a person who is blind basically talks about his experiences and the things that he's still seeing are failing, and then some of the improvements. And it aligns a lot with what WebAIM discovered. And again, I can be a resource. I am most active on Twitter at click2carney. LinkedIn, it's kind of touch and go. Sometimes I'm on there, but I do have that if you want to follow me, and I might even connect with you back if you leave me more than a message than I want to connect. So I know who you are and what your intentions are. So let's go ahead and roll out those questions. Sorry it took so long.
No worries. Thanks, Amy. Does anyone have any questions at this time? Feel free to submit them via Q&A. And just as a reminder, we are recording, and we also will send out a link, all the links that Amy has passed along, as well as the presentation from tonight. I will send those out via email tomorrow. Any questions?
Is everyone completely overwhelmed now?
No worries. One attendee commented, "Thank you, this was great. I'm looking forward to seeing some coding examples of this stuff next week." We did have one question just come in from Julie Ann, a question or a comment. A11Y, colorblind empathy tester. Is that a question? We're getting great feedback in the chat. Thank you so much. This is so helpful. Thank you. I've installed the extensions you sent. And if anybody doesn't have any further questions at this time, let's all give Amy a big thank you. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. And thank you all for attending this webinar. We look forward to seeing you next week in our final webinar, our final series for this event. And oh yeah, Julianne was just commenting, it's a lookup tool that lets you see pages from assorted colorblind experiences.
Oh yeah, like an
Gotcha.
emulator. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I know there's some extensions for that too. That would be good. Oh, and also I should think now that you mentioned when you're emailing out to people, I am also on the Women Who Code Slack.
Oh yeah.
So anybody can private message me on there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions as all this information digests this evening, feel free to reach out to Amy via Slack if you're on the Women Who Code front end Slack. Let me actually post a link right now for you all. Otherwise, you can expect to receive an email from me tomorrow with all of the links as well as the presentation from tonight. But again, let's all give Amy a huge thank you for her time and sharing with us more about web accessibility.
And I think I found what Julianne was talking about. So I'm going to drop that in the chat too, because I'm going to have to try this out. It looks like there's a Chrome extension right off.
Nice, nice.
So
Great.
thanks,
And I just
Julianne.
post, yeah, thank you, Julianne. And I just posted the link to the Slack too. So you can message me. You can be part of our general group Slack. That's generally where you can hear about events or join in different study groups. And it's also a great place to reach out to Amy with any further questions. But again, thank you, Amy, on behalf of Women in Code. Thank you for your time. And we
You're
look forward
welcome.
to seeing you all next week.
All right.